Winning the right to vote and having that vote counted was a more elusive goal for Texans of African American and Hispanic descent than it was for women. Before the Civil War, nearly all African Americans in Texas were slaves. None could vote or hold public office. The Civil War ended slavery, but Texas's white political establishment refused to enfranchise former slaves. During Reconstruction, military rule forced Southern states to grant African Americans the right to vote. African Americans were registered to vote for the first time in Texas in 1876. After the early 1870s, however, Texas politics began to return to the pattern in place before the Civil War. After Reconstruction, Texas was a one-party state with the dominance of the Democratic Party. Texas restricted the voting rights of minorities in order to maintain the political power of whites. By 1900, the state had roughly 650,000 potential African American voters, but only about 25,000 were qualified to vote under Texas law. In the early 20th century, the white economic establishment in Texas restricted minority voting rights in order to maintain political power. Disenfranchisement, the denial of voting rights, was the response of the economic elites to the attempt of the Populist Party to win power by uniting lower-income voters of all races against the wealthy economic interests who controlled state politics. The poll tax and the white primary were the main instruments of disenfranchisement for African Americans. The white primary prohibited African Americans from voting in Democratic primaries. This practice was important because Texas was, during this period, a dominant one-party state, with the Democratic Party being the dominant party. For all practical purposes, then, candidates had to be Democrats in order to win the general election. The Republican Party simply was not competitive for many, many decades following Reconstruction. As a consequence, this meant that the real election contest occurred in the Democratic Party primaries. Thus, by banning participation by African Americans, the white establishment of the Democratic Party effectively disenfranchised African American voters. In 1923, the Texas legislature codified this practice into state law. However, in a 1924 case, Nixon versus Herndon, the United States Supreme Court struck that Texas law down as a violation of the 15th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which prohibited the states from denying the right to vote on the basis of race. Subsequent to the Supreme Court's decision in the case, the Texas Democratic Party adopted a rule banning participation by African Americans. The constitutionality of this party rule was challenged in Grovey versus Townsend, a 1934 case. In this case, the Supreme Court held that the 15th Amendment only prohibited the states from denying the right to vote on the basis of race, not private organizations. Since it considered the Texas Democratic Party a private organization, it sustained the party's prerogative to enforce its rule. However, 10 years later, in 1944, the Supreme Court reversed its judgment in Smith versus Allwright, holding that the Democratic Party was, in a sense, acting as an agent of the state of Texas, and therefore also prohibited by the 15th Amendment from denying the right to vote on the basis of race.